Hi Ceramics A, and this is a video on the basics to throwing on the wheel. I'm going to narrate over a demonstration video I did last year, and give you a little bit of clear direction in case that you start on the wheel and feel a little frustrated in a certain area. You can go back and watch that area specifically over again. All right? So let's start with you've thrown your clay down on the wheel and you're focusing on getting it centered. So you're pressing with your palms as if they were kind of like a bulldozer, and you're pressing across the wheel away from you. You want to keep your elbows down, kind of keep them on the top of your thighs or kind of on your hips, and press forward. If you lift your elbows up like you see here and do any kind of movement, the clay will get thrown off center. So think about your arms like T-Rex arms, very close to your body, and use your upper body weight to kind of lean forward towards the clay until it starts to do what you want it to do. You know that a hunk of clay is centered on the wheel, as you can see here, if when you place your hands on the clay and just kind of hold the clay itself as you spin the wheel, your hands will not wobble around like this. So they will just sit perfectly around the clay, and then you'll know it's perfectly centered. You're doing this at a pretty fast pace to start out with, and the longer you go through this process, the slower your pace becomes. Keep in mind the concept of centrifugal force, and that the faster we go, the more pressure is being applied to this clay, and it wants to flatten out. Okay, so the farther we get, the slower we want to go. So now I'm going to start to cone the clay. So I'm pressing forward with those bulldozer hands again, leaning in, and I'm also pinching back with my fingertips, almost in like a kind of a crab claw. All right, and that causes the clay to go up. All right, and then I follow that by birthday caking it back down into a nice little mound that looks like a birthday cake. We call it a birthday cake because it's wider than it is tall. All right, and so that it's a great shape to open up the clay and start your form. So I'm going to cone up with that claw. So I'm pushing forward with my palms and pulling back with my fingertips. The clay is going to go up. All right, and then I'm going to birthday cake it back down into a nice little mound before I start to open up the clay. All right, so you're going to do that birthday cake, or that, excuse me, cone and birthday cake process twice at least in order to get all of the particles in the clay organized, which will be helpful later for sturdier clay that's more centered and more resilient. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video for 1 second. This step is where we start to open up the clay and begin to make our form. So it's important that at this point your clay is completely centered. If it's not, stop, recenter it just by pushing your palms against the clay, leaning forward, and kind of applying a gentle pressure until the clay stops wobbling in your hands, okay? If you open up at this point and it is not centered, you're going to end up with a lot of obstacles as you move forward. Uneven wall thickness, the wall will be higher on one side than it is on the other, and it's just more things to correct along the way. So I stress the importance of making sure that you're centered at this point before you move forward. Okay, so opening up the clay, you hold on to the clay with both hands, just as you would if you were centering, and you're going to press down with your thumbs. They will naturally find the center, as you can see I did there. I then switch to using my middle fingers because they're longer and I find it's easier to kind of drill down in through the clay. But you can continue using your thumbs and just pressing down into the hunk of clay. It's important that you hold on to the clay while you work and not just kind of press down. All right, this holding on to the clay keeps it centered. And then using a needle tool to stab down into the bottom of the clay until I hit the bat. I then run my finger to the bottom of the clay until I hit clay at the bottom of the pot, hold on to it, and when I lift it up, that'll show me how much of the needle tool has pierced through the bottom layer of clay, and I can tell how thick the foot of my form is. It's a helpful step, but it's not completely necessary. We can do some things to take away some of the thickness in the bottom later on. But it's definitely something you should get in the habit of working on. The next step is I'm going to kind of open up. You see the center of that form opening up. I'm hooking my hand All right, similar to how I did when I drilled down with my middle fingers, but now I'm going to pull back towards myself and stretch that opening, and it creates the bottom of the mug. There I'm showing you with both hands doing something like this where your elbows are up, all right, or something in front of you like that, is going to knock your form off center. It's important that you keep your elbows in and down. Keep them on your legs like I'm doing here to open that form up. So I'm pulling back towards myself, and you can see that the form is getting a larger opening in the center. I'm going to take a rib then and flatten the bottom. This is key because you want a nice flat bottom to your form so that you can see exactly where your clay for the walls is. And it keeps the clay from hiding in the bottom corner where the base of your form meets the wall. All right, so I'm flattening with the rib tool, just the bottom of the form. We can always do that later, but it's easiest at this step. And you can see that I have kind of a nice donut of clay around, right around here. Okay, a nice donut of clay. All right, so the next step that you can see here, let me rewind a second, is what we call the claw. So the clay's spinning at a nice, kind of a slower pace, actually, much slower than when you were centering. All right, and let me talk about my hand placement here. So my left hand is a claw. It's hooked over the clay here. My thumb's on the outside, and my 4 other fingers are on the inside. All right. The thumb acts as a guide, so I can rest my outside hand, my right pointer finger, against my thumb, and I line these 2 pointer fingers up. Pretend they're connected by an invisible line, all right, so that I know that they're perfectly lined up with each other if the clay weren't there, okay? So you use this thumb here to support your outside hand so that it doesn't wobble, all right? So if they're connected, they're moving simultaneously as the same unit, rather than something like this where they're lifting and you're not unable to keep them at the exact same position the whole way up the wall of clay. So we're going to pull, it's called a pull. So we're going to start from the bottom, we're going to pull up, all right, and the clay is going to begin to rise. All right, so I'm gentle pressure, and I'm lifting, and you're going to do this probably at least 4 times. If you could do it all in one pull, it gets really off center. The better you get, the faster it'll become, but you want to really shoot for at least 4 or 5 pulls. All right, so I'm going to start to pull my clay. So left hand's a claw, and I'm lifting up. Now, as you see there, I'm going way too fast. So I'm demonstrating how you must go relative to the pace of your wheel. So think about the clay should spin through your finger 1 time, all right, all the way around 1 time before I lift it all. So the faster my wheel is going, the faster my pull will be because they're relative to each other. But I'm going to slowly pull up. And you can see, think about it almost as like a tightly coiled spring. You can see my finger marks as I pull. When I get to the top, I slowly, I release a little bit of the pressure so I don't rip the top, and then I start all the way back at the bottom of the form again and do the same thing, straight up and down. Notice my elbows are still down, and my arms are kind of hinging almost like a crane would. All right, my fingertips are lined up, but it's important that both hands are actually touching. Okay? All right, so I've pulled my walls, and I want them to be about the thickness of a pencil or maybe slightly thinner. All right, from there, I'm going to skip ahead. We can start to change the shape of the form. So you always want to start with a cylinder. All right, so straight walls, they're nice and even, and then you can begin to either belly out, more like a bowl, or collar in, which would be more like a vase, to get those forms. All right, so All right, the topic of bellying out. So I'm cupping the outside of this form with my right hand, all right, for support. It's not really pressing, it's almost just giving me something to press the clay against. I'm pressing with my inside hand. Notice how they're still connected for support. And I'm simply bellying out the clay. So that right hand is on the outside, the left hand is pushing in to that hand. All right, and I'm slowly stretching the clay into a wider shape. Okay? That's called bellying. That's how we make a larger form. I'm going to then switch to my sponge, and I'm going to sponge all the way from the foot of the form all the way up the outside and back down the inside of the form as well. All right, removing any slip from the surface is important. All right. The slip, once dried, will stay exactly as it is when you leave it, so it can become sharp and make the glaze look a little bit like kind of a little messy. They'll come up as white marks on the surface of the clay. I'm then going to undercut my foot. My foot being right here, I want to get rid of some of this clay, so I'm using a wooden tool, and I'm undercutting, so I'm simply carving away some of that clay there at the foot of the bowl. All right, I'm doing it in a couple sections, and I'm doing it slowly. All right, and I always want my form to kind of come in here at the bottom. It's when it kind of looks as though it's melting onto the bat. It's going to be a much heavier form, and it's just not as nice to use, and we have to be really careful when we're glazing them. All right, the final step after undercutting is to write your name on the bat in the slip, kind of like your finger painting. And then we'll move these to the rack next to the glaze kiln to dry overnight. When you come back tomorrow, they'll be ready to remove from the bat, and you can cheese grade, which you can find directions for that in my next video called Rasping Your Pottery. All right. Good luck tomorrow. I'm sure you will do wonderful on the wheel, and check back here if you need any help with any of the steps. Don't forget, there are illustrated versions of these directions in your orange workbook as well. Best of luck!